Hi there, gorgeous. So it's great to see you here and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to our first episode on this 10 episode series on chronic inflammation. My name is Katsumi Sakamoto. I'm a health coach and I help my clients. I educate and empower them so they can make the right decisions regarding their health and they can live more active and a better performance life. Okay? And the reason why I've decided to talk about this idea of chronic inflammation is that it can be one of the most important reasons for a lot of the diseases that we are experiencing today, and there isn't enough people talking about the subject. So that's why I've decided to do this 10 episode series. So the next 10 weeks we're going to be talking about this subject and we're going to go very deep into all the science that there is available on this specific problem, right? So what I intend to do here is to educate you on everything there is on chronic inflammation and give you practical tools so you can yourself make the informed decision to have a greater life, to have a better life. And if you're watching this and you're not a health professional, do not worry, okay? Because I'm not going to be using all those scientific crazy terms that only scientists understand. My aim here is to make this information available to as many people as possible so we can share it and spread it so more and more of us all around the world can understand and act upon something that is really, really bad for all of us all around. So, without further ado, let's just crack on with it, right? And before we go all deep and we talk about all these little details, I think it is important for us to give a definition of what chronic inflammation is, right? So what we're going to be talking about, what is that? Yeah, I've heard of inflammation, and I'm guessing most of you have, right? So if you've heard of inflammation, you've probably treated some sort of inflammation along your life, during your life with over-the-counter medicines. And what it's important for you to understand now is that we're going to classify two types of inflammation. The acute inflammation, which is the good one, right? So that is the kind of inflammation that we're used to, that we see when we get a cut, for example, when we burn ourselves. What happens is that our defense system gives a response, an inflammatory response, to eliminate that threat they just recognized in that wound, in that burn, whatever, yeah? So when we hurt ourselves, our bodies, they recognize there is something wrong with that place. And then they send all these defense organisms that we have, our white blood cells, and they go there and they treat it. And that process actually generates something that we usually see, some redness, some swelling, and it gets tender to the touch, right? That's our acute inflammation, and that is very important for our system to do, because then it helps us, it can even save our lives. Chronic inflammation, on the other hand, deteriorates our bodies. Literally makes us older and weaker. And the problem is, it is not something that we wake up with. So we're not going to wake up tomorrow feeling chronic inflamed. It doesn't happen like that. It is silent. I think it was Time magazine that had like a whole cover with chronic inflammation, the silent killer. a few years back, 2013, 14, or something like that. Okay, so it is something that happens silently and gradually inside our bodies. So we don't feel it's happening, and when it actually appears, it manifests into very serious diseases that we are very accustomed to see nowadays, and we even consider it age-related diseases, but they don't have to be. And here I'm talking about just a few examples, right? We're going to go more in depth on those diseases later on during the series, but what chronic inflammation may cause or aggravate includes type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, Alzheimer's, depression, arthritis. So all these diseases that we are seeing more and more often and even earlier in our lives, they come from the same problem, which is chronic inflammation. The most probable reason for that to happen is our lifestyle. So we are 100% responsible when it comes to avoiding it and treating it. And that's why it's so powerful. Because if we have that information, if we actually understand how serious it is to avoid chronic inflammation, and we act upon it, we can literally add life to our years. Right? So the biggest reason, it is our lifestyle, and it has a lot to do with our nutrition. We used to have balanced diets when it came to pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory substances. Nowadays, mostly because of the amount of processed foods that we eat, our diet has shifted completely in that sense, and it's completely unbalanced, getting us to the point of developing this chronic inflammation very early on in our lives. As an example, if you talk about type 2 diabetes, when I graduated from Physical Education University back in 2009, when we talked about type 2 diabetes, we were usually imagining people at least over 40, but mostly over 50, over 60. Nowadays, it's very common to see people on their early 20s, 30s, being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Even children. And that has a lot to do with the way that we are eating. We're not eating a balanced enough diet to avoid those problems. And we can go back over 2,500 years ago. A guy named Hippocrates, right? The medicine people know him a lot, yeah? But Hippocrates, back in the day, he already knew. Let thy food be your medicine, and your medicine be thy food. Right? So, as humans, we knew back then that our nutrition was so important on preventing and treating diseases. And because our modern world doesn't really allow us to have that time to take care of our meals the way you used to a few decades back, then we start developing problems like this one. So chronic inflammation is a silent killer. It deteriorates our bodies from within, gets us older, weaker, and it helps develop very serious diseases. Even some types of cancer can be related to chronic inflammation. So the idea of this series is to first shout out there, Let's worry about these things. Spread the word that it is important for us to be aware of that. Raise awareness in every corner of this world about how serious chronic inflammation can be. Understand how it affects our bodies on our cellular level, how we can avoid it, practical ways that we can fight it. And if we manage to put together and put into action all these ideas that we're going to be talking about over this next 10 weeks, I can guarantee you that you are going to be feeling better. You might even solve some problems that you thought weren't possible to be solved. I'm not a doctor, so this is not a medical claim. But once we start treating ourselves from within, we see how our bodies react in an extremely positive manner in just a few weeks' time. So thank you for joining us. I hope you follow us for the next 10 weeks during this series. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how we can develop each other here and how we can bring some new ideas to our day-to-day that are very simple and very practical, that can help us have a much more active life and a much better performance all around. So thank you so much for listening until now. And remember, you are much more amazing than you think. I'll see you soon.